Hi, everybody. Welcome to this session on Project Explorer. My name is Doug Hennig. I'm a partner with Stonefield Software. A little bit of details about me. I've written a few products you may have heard of, Stonefield Query and Stonefield Database Toolkit. About a year ago, I made Stonefield Database Toolkit SDT open source, so it's available on GitHub. I've written a number of tools that come with Visual Fox Pro, including the member data editor and the anchor editor. And in Sedna, I've written over 100 articles in a variety of magazines, written a number of books over the years, one of the organizers of Southwest Fox and Virtual Fox Fest. I'm one of the administrators of VFPX, the open source site for Visual Fox Pro software. I was an MVP for about 15 years, and I was a Fox Pro Lifetime Achievement Award awardee, I guess. This session is going to be about Project Explorer, which is a relatively new tool. It's been out for a couple of years now, but I know that a number of people are using it, but I wanted to, get the word out and see if we can get some more people using this tool. The Visual Fox Pro Project Manager is one of the oldest tools around for Visual Fox Pro, and it has a number of shortcomings. First of all, you really can't filter or organize items. Let's just switch over for a second. I'll show you. Find my Visual Fox Pro window. This is the project for Stonefield Query. So as you can see, there are lots of classes and lots of class libraries and lots of classes within those class libraries. There's lots of PRGs. There's a bazillion files. And the only organization is really by type, documents, classes, code, and so on. And then within that, it's simply alphabetical by name. And that's it. That's the only organization mechanism that you get. It might be nice, for example, to see only those things that are not framework classes. For example, if you're using a framework like, say, Visual Fox Express or Visual Max Frame, you might not want to see the framework classes. You may only want to see your classes. Maybe you want to show things in the last modified order, so you can, here are the things I worked on most recently. None of that's available in the project manager. It also only works with one project. Stonefield Query actually consists of 10 different projects. So I would have to open up each one and then build an executable or a DLL or whatever. Now, in fact, I used to use a batch file that would do that for, or a PRG actually run from a batch file that would go in and automatically build those projects for me, but it was still a pain. If you've used Visual Studio, you know that it has a solution explorer where you can have multiple projects open at a time, and you can choose to build one project or the entire solution. In addition, there's no support for distributed version control systems. There is for some version control systems, like SourceSafe, for example, but not for the newer ones that most people are using, such as Mercurial or Git. There's just no integrated support for that. So you end up doing things either from the command line or using a GUI or, say, from File Explorer, for example. So with all these shortcomings in mind, a few years ago, I created a tool that I call Project Explorer. It probably is slightly misnamed. It should probably maybe be called Solution Explorer, because as we'll see, it supports multiple projects. But I called it Project Explorer, and that's its name. It only sort of replaces a project manager. I say sort of because, in fact, the project manager is still used. You still have a PJX and PJT file, and they're actually open. When the Project Explorer is open, the project manager for those projects is open. It's just they're not visible, so you don't see them. But behind the scenes, that project manager is there so that we can do a variety of things with it. So first of all, how do you get the Project Explorer? How do you install it? One way is using git clone. So if we go to here, if you go to github.com/DougHennig/Project Explorer, this is the GitHub site for Project Explorer. And there's a couple of ways you can get it from here. When you click the code button, you can choose clone. So if you are already using Git and you want to make a copy of it that way, you can clone the project and it will create that on your machine. A simpler way that probably most people use is just clicking download zip. That simply downloads a zip file with all the source code, documentation, everything. You simply unzip it wherever you want. Another way to do it is with Thor check for updates. So if I launch Visual Fox Pro, if you have Thor, and I'm not going to do it because it takes a couple of minutes, but if you choose Thor check for updates, then what it will do is it will go and find all of the tools that have been installed in Thor, and Project Explorer is one of the things there. Once you've installed it, it's ready for use. And so now let's talk about using it, and then we'll take a tour of Project Explorer. I'm going to turn off my webcam. And let's take a look at a number of things in Project Explorer. First of all, how do you start it? We'll spend some time looking at the user interface, how you manage individual items, how you build projects, how it supports integration with version control, and then other kinds of functionality. And let me just launch VFP. Oops, there we go. All right, so let's do Project Explorer.app. So you can specify what folder it's in, and then Project Explorer.app. So that's one way you can do it, is you do that. Now, the first time you do it in a particular folder, it hasn't created a solution file yet. We'll take a look at a solution file in a minute, but it hasn't created a solution file yet. So it's asking you to locate one. And there are two different kinds of solution files. The older mechanism was a file called solution.xml. The newer solution, or the newer way of doing it, is with a file named the same as one of your projects, like demo, for example, .xml. It works either way, so that's why it's looking for a solution, either an SLX file or the older solution.xml. Now, in this case, we don't have one. So if you choose the save as file as type, you can choose project, and then you can pick up a specific project. So I'll choose this demo1 project, and Project Explorer opens up. It actually created a solution file for us, and we'll look at that in a little bit. But it opens up the with this particular project. Another way you can do it is you can pass as a command line parameter with the name of the project. So I can say demo1.pjx. So when I press enter, if there is not a solution file for this project, it will create it and then open up the Project Explorer for that solution. Another way you can do it from the command line is by specifying a specific solution file. So demo1.slx. And if that didn't exist, it would create it and ask you to locate a project, because we wouldn't have told it project. But anyway, there already was one in, so it opened it up. The way that I actually do it, though, is through Thor. So once you've installed it, you can add it as a Thor tool. And so I've got it set up here under Thor Tools, Applications, Project Explorer. And I have a hotkey associated with it, Control-Alt-P. So all that I need to do is to hit Control-Alt-P, and it automatically opens up. When the Project Explorer opens, the first thing it does is it checks to see, is there a solution.xml or an SLX file? And if there's only one of them, then it just automatically opens it. So when you're in a folder, it just automatically opens up that solution file. If there's more than one, it prompts you, or if there isn't one, it prompts you. So if you have, and typically you're going to have a single solution file in a folder, because you can have multiple projects. So let's take a look at the UI now for Project Explorer. First thing you'll notice is it looks different than the Project Manager. Let's go and choose one of these tabs here. It looks a little similar. There's a tree view control, and it has, you know, something here for classes and code and data and documents and so on, but it's not tabs. But the tree view kind of looks the same. There isn't a place at the bottom where you can see the description. So it's a little more compact. A little bit more modern looking. Instead of having some text buttons over the side, it has graphical buttons and a toolbar across the top. There's a hamburger menu here. So rather than having to go and go up to the project menu in the FoxPro menu, it's sort of associated with the window. This drop-down list, instead of seeing tabs for the different types of things, there is a data-driven list, and we'll see what I mean by data-driven in a few minutes. And so again, a little bit more compact than having tabs across the top. So I can choose code, for example, and see code, or I can choose classes. So it works the same as the tabs. You notice this window is actually set to desktop. So it floats above the Visual FoxPro window. And in fact, because I work with two monitors, I typically don't have it sitting in the FoxPro area. You won't be able to see this because I'm moving it onto my second monitor. But typically what I do is I have it sitting on a second monitor, so the entire Visual FoxPro workspace is available for editing or other things. So like I said, that's the way I typically like to work with it. However, you can actually have this window to appear a little bit differently. We'll talk about that in a little bit. It uses the same icons as the Project Manager, so these probably look familiar to you, all the different icons for different types of classes and for different types of files and so on. Let's go and add another project to the solution. Right now, it only is for demo 1, but let's go and add another one. So I'm going to click on the menu here and choose Add Project to Solution, and we'll choose Demo 2. And so now I have 2 projects in my solution. So like the Visual Studio solution Explorer, you can have multiple projects in your solution here. Let's go and take a look at some of the properties for objects. As I mentioned, the window is a little bit smaller, a little bit more compact than the Project Explorer window, but it can be expanded. If you click on this green button over here, that expands the window. So now you can see properties about the thing you've selected. So in the case of a visual class library, for example, you can see the name of the class. You can see the path to it. The path is shown as a relative path to the project itself. So it shows source. It's in the source subdirectory, sfcontrols.vcx. If you want to see the full path, just go to the menu and choose options. And you can turn on display full path for project files. And now it's displaying the full path. So whichever mechanism you want, you just change that whenever you want to, about whether it's showing the full path or the relative path. A nice feature is that if you click the path link, it actually opens up a File Explorer window with that folder selected. So now you can look around and do things in that folder. It shows a number of things you can't see in the project manager. For example, the last modified date for any class in this file, whether this file is excluded or not. You can see the description, which you do see at the bottom of the project manager, but you can edit the description right here instead of having to bring up a modal dialog. One thing that's not available anywhere in the project manager is the user content. PJX files have a user memo where you can store some stuff, but it's not easy to get at. You have to open up the project as a table, use whatever.pjx, browse it, find the record that you want, and then you can manually put in content, or you could do programmatically, put content into the user memo for whatever purpose you want. Here, we allow you to edit it right here within the UI. We'll talk about tags and categories in a little bit. Let's go and look at a class. So for example, SF Combo List Box. We can see, again, the last modified date for this class. We can see what its parent class is. This is a subclass of SF Combo Box, which is also contained in sfcontrols.vcx, and its base class is a combo box. Again, these are not things that are visible within the project manager. Some of these have links. So again, path would bring up the File Explorer, but if I click on class, it'll actually take me back to it'll automatically select the parent class within that. If I click on library, it'll take me to the object for the library that the class belongs to. If I click include file, which you can see, like I said, you can't see that normally. If I click include file, it'll take me to the other tab and select the include file for that class. Let's go back to classes. And I can see other things such as whether it's OLE public or not, what icon should be used. Simply click this button and pick an icon file, and that's the icon that'll be used for the class. And toolbar icon, this is the icon that would appear in the toolbar when you choose the class library, in the file form controls class library. And of course, we have description and user, same as we had before. If we look at the project, this would actually require multiple dialogues to be able to get at these properties, multiple modal dialogues. Whereas here you can change them. You can change the author and the company and so on. You can click on home to bring up the File Explorer with that home. User memo, you can set the project hook. You can attach an icon. Build settings, this would be a different modal dialog. You can change the version information, the version number, and servers, yet another modal dialog where it would show any server classes. This one doesn't have any, but this project does. So here, for example, we can see there's a COM server. It has this class library, this class name. Notice there's hyperlinks on those to take you directly to that and the various settings for that. You can, let's talk about tags and categories. Under the hamburger menu here is a tag editor. So there's a number of built-in tags. Tags are the things that appear in this combo box here. So there's a number of built-in tags, so you can't modify them or delete them. But we can add a new one. Let's say, for example, we want to create one called framework. So this would be for all of our framework classes, things that are, like I said, if you're using Visual Fox Express or Visual Max Frame, something like that, you can tag those classes and PRGs as being framework classes and then display them. So let's see how we'll tag those. Let's go to our SF Controls class, and let's say that this is going to be a framework. In addition to classes, I also want it to be tagged as a framework, and we'll save that. It asks me, do I want to assign child items the same tags and category? In this case, I'm going to say yes. Let's go to a form. And although this one really isn't a framework class, I'm going to say that it is anyway, just so we can see how that works. So we'll say framework, and then we'll say save. So now you'll notice that this drop-down list now has, in addition to the ones we saw before, framework. So as I mentioned, this is a data-driven list that is completely under your control, except for the built-in ones. So when I choose framework, now I'm only seeing those things that are framework classes. So I don't see any PRGs. I don't see any of the other type files. I don't see anything else. I don't see any other VCXs. I only see the things that I tagged as framework. Another way you could break things down is via category. So let's go to the category editor, and there's a number of built-in categories. These things have different colors, and the color, the name of the category is the same as the color, but that's just the way it starts. You can change that though. For example, let's change this category and we'll call it incomplete. This is a class or a PRG that isn't finished yet. And I actually want the foreground color to be white, and I want the background color to be red, and I want to display it by background color. Let's go to, say, green, and I'll just leave the label at green, but let's change the color to a different green. And maybe blue, we'll call that untested, for example. So these are classes that are completed but haven't been tested yet. All right, so now let's go to, say, my SF checkbox. I started working in this class, but I haven't finished it yet. So we'll make it a category of incomplete, and we'll save that. And let's go to my combo box, and we'll say that that one is green. Okay, so you can see in the tree view now that checkbox, anything that has incomplete as its category, shows up with a red background and white foreground text. And anything that's marked here as green appears with green text on a white background. Excuse me. Now, rather than assigning tags and categories individually one at a time, which might be a lot of work, you can actually go to the hamburger menu here and choose add or remove tags and categories. So I could say, for example, I want to tag as framework anything that meets certain conditions. And the condition is anything that would be a logical, a reasonable expression. Now, typically, it's going to be the property of an item. And so we have a drop-down list of all the different item properties. For example, can edit, can include, and so on. Some of those maybe wouldn't be useful for this, but one that would be, for example, is, say, item name. So we can say item.item name. Let's put that into the code here. And we'll say left item.item name, comma, 2 equals SF, because my naming convention is that SF, which is an abbreviation for Stonefield. Anything starting with SF would be a framework class. Anything that's not a framework class that's specific for the application wouldn't start with an SF. Now, I'm not going to go and click OK, but if I did, anything that starts with an SF would have the tag framework added to it, or removed, because I can choose to remove it. And the other option here is to apply those to child items as well. So I won't bother saving that. So now, what's the difference between a tag and a category? To me, a tag is something about where this thing belongs in the project explorer, and that's controlled by this. So anything that's a framework is the framework is going to appear in this list, and when I choose framework, I only see framework things. If I choose classes, I see things that are tagged as classes. Whereas category is more, in my opinion, more of a short-term thing. Like this class right now is incomplete, but eventually it will become complete, and then I'll change its category to something else. So it's a way of visually identifying something about a class, and you can also filter on it, as we'll see in a moment. But it's not exactly the same. It's not really, doesn't represent what this thing is. It represents maybe more like its current state. But those are just my definitions. You know, you can define them however you see fit. The only thing to keep in mind is that tags appear on the drop-down list. Category determines what color the thing appears in. So whatever that means to you, that's up to you. Speaking of filtering, either through the file menu here, either choosing sort and filter, or with the toolbar, you can click this button here, and that allows you to sort and filter the tree views. So for example, the three ways you can sort are by name alphabetically, or either in ascending or descending order, by last modified date, or by category. So if we go, for example, last modified date in descending order, now you can see, for example, that SF form, which I changed a couple of days ago, is on the top of the list, and SF checkbox, which I changed the day before that, is next in the list, and everything else is much earlier, 2013 here and 2013 and so on. So having it appear in descending order by last modified date is great, because those things that I changed most recently are the things that I'm likely to continue changing. Maybe I was working on it and I didn't finish. Maybe I was working on it and now there's a bug, you know, that kind of thing. Or I was working on it and didn't finish testing it, and so on. So I'm likely to go back to those same classes over and over again until I'm finished with them. Let's go and put that back to name in ascending order, and let's do a filter. And again, you're going to likely filter on some kind of property. For example, and you can filter again on pretty much any of the properties for the items. So for example, you know, description is not empty, or you know, anything that's excluded, anything that has children, any binary files. You know, that way it'll exclude all of the PRGs, for example. Anything that is a file, so you wouldn't see classes, just things like VCXs and PRGs and so on. But the thing I'm going to choose here is last modified, and we'll say last modified is greater than date -7. So when I choose OK, now I only see those things that were modified in the last 7 days. So I don't see any of the other things in the project. We'll go and just take that out and choose OK, and now we're back to seeing everything again. Any questions, Rick?
Yes. In the project manager, one is able to seek the first item in whatever category they're in. Not so with the project explorer. Will this be addressed?
How do you mean seek? Like pressing the home key or something like that?
You can do incremental search with the keyboard on the list.
Oh, I see. Okay, so if I type like SFL, oops, sorry, focus was in there. I want to revert that. Let's set focus to the tree view. SFL, yeah, it does.
Okay. Next question: if I'm in a type like quote my code, and I add a program, it is added to the code category. I have to subsequently indicate that it belongs to my code. Is that something that could be addressed?
So you mean, so I think the question is that upon adding, you want to automatically specify a category. Is that right?
Yeah, probably to the one that you currently have selected.
Oh, I see. Okay. Sure. Let me add that to the list here. So we want to auto add a new item to the current category. Okay.
All right. And is there a way to share solution files so that categories persist among developers?
The categories are actually not solution specific. Categories and tags are currently, anyway, global. So when you've defined your categories and tags, they are available for all solutions. So the way that you share them, I was going to show this later on, but I can show you right now. The way that the tags and categories are defined is in the Project Explorer source folder, wherever you got Project Explorer installed. There are two tables, Project Explorer categories.dbf and Project Explorer tags.dbf. So that's where tags and categories are stored. So they're not solution specific. So if you want to share them, you simply would have Project Explorer maybe sitting in some common folder, or you might, for example, put these in solution in version control and then merge changes between them.
Okay, and the last question is, if I have a tag called foo and I assign some component to that tag, it does not show in the foo list until I restart Project Manager. Can you?
No, like I just showed that, in fact, right? I just set a tag of framework and it immediately showed up in the framework list. So let's do another one. Let's go to tag editor. We'll say add, and I'll call it foo. And we'll close that, and I'll go and tag this guy here. And you notice foo is available right now. So I can choose foo, and I can save that. And when I choose, and you notice foo is now available here. When I choose the foo drop-down, oh, okay. I could have sworn that worked. Okay.
Maybe you might mention that there's a repository where you can submit issues.
Good point. Yeah, if you go to GitHub, the GitHub repository that I showed earlier, there's an issues tab there, and you can report issues there. And that's actually the best place to put it, because that way we can have discussions between various folks and so on. Okay, any other questions?
Not for yet.
Okay. So let's go and look at a few other things. So let's just make this one a little bit smaller. And one thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to options. And as I mentioned earlier, if this is a desktop window, but I can make it dockable instead. So if you want to dock Project Explorer with, say, the command window or the properties window, or at the side of the VFP screen, you can do that. I'm going to set it to neither. And you have to close and reopen Project Explorer in order for that to take effect. The reason I'm going to do this is because now it's not a project window, but now it's not going to appear on top of everything. So when I go and modify some forms and some classes and some PRGs, I'm not going to have to fight with the windows, because I have a very limited resolution here. All right, so let's talk about some of the other functionality. I can go and modify anything by clicking the modify button in the toolbar. So I've selected this PRG and I can click modify, and then I can make a change. Do anything that I need to adhere. Modify is available for everything except for FLLs. So even things that the project manager doesn't allow you to modify, if we go to the other tab and choose, say, a BMP file and modify it, it launches whatever, it just does a shell execute. So it launches whatever application is registered to modify BMPs, for example. If I modify, I'm not going to bother showing it, but if I modify a VCX, it actually launches the class browser, and so on. Well, you can also double click a file. So if I double click this, that launches the editor, but that's under your control. Same as it is in VFP. You can, with the options dialog, with the Project Explorer options dialog, you can choose whether double clicking runs or modifies. And this actually changes the project manager setting as well, because it's the same setting. The new button, or sorry, the run button, let's go and choose back to our PRG here. Run button will run a lot of different kinds of things. So it's just running that program. In the case of a table, so if I go down to my data tab and choose a table, it actually does a browse. In fact, the tooltip changes to browse. So it actually does a browse on that table. Let's go back to our classes. The new button is available for just about everything. But there are certain special dialogues. For example, if I go to code and choose new, it brings up a save as dialog. Unlike the project manager, where you can edit the code first, and then upon closing, you specify the name. Here we're doing it the opposite way. We ask you to specify the file name first, so that way it knows what file to create, and then it can sort of keep track of that. If you choose a class, there's actually some special handling with classes. So for example, if I choose this SF edit box and click on the new button, the new class dialog has some cool features in it. Obviously, you can specify the class name, but it has an MRU list, most recently used list of VCXs. So for example, because these are the two VCXs I've used in the last little while, I can choose either one of them, and then I get to choose from the drop-down list of based on a class that's in that VCX. So I'm not always clicking on this button here to go and navigate and find a VCX that I've navigated to 100 times. That way it stays in the list. I just choose it from the drop-down list, and now I choose the class that I want that to be based on. And then of course I choose where to store it in. And another choice here, 99% of the time, you're going to subclass a class, but occasionally you will actually want to clone it. So rather, I mean, you can do that in VFP by dragging and dropping in the project manager, right? You can click a class and you can drag it and drop it onto another VCX. That would create a copy of it. You can do that in Project Explorer as well, but here's just a faster way. Just click on copy, and now it essentially clones this SF checkbox and puts it into, obviously you have to use a different VCX, but it would well, no, sorry, you don't, because you put a different name here, and then it would clone this into the FFF class. So it's not it's still going to be in this case a subclass of checkbox, not a subclass of SF checkbox. If you choose a form class, you can right-click it and choose Create Form from Class. So that's, instead of clicking the New button, you can create a form directly from this class. Or if you're sitting on the Documents tab, when you click New, the New Form button, the New Form dialog comes up. And again, you can choose from an MRU list of VCXs, and it only displays things that are subclasses of form. So if I want to make a subclass of SF modal dialog, I can put a name in here, and that would create a new form based on this class in this class library. So lots of little things, lots of little enhancements that help improve your productivity. The remove button the add button will add a file. So if I could add a PRG or add a form or whatever. The remove button does pretty much what you think it would do. We already talked about filtering. We already talked about expanding the window. This is the back button. So this takes you back to an earlier item. So if you click on the drop-down button here are all the things that I've clicked on as I was doing the demo. So if I go back to SF controls, it'll take me back to SF controls. Clicking the button once takes you back to the most recent thing, but choosing the drop-down allows you to go back to one of the things that you had looked at earlier in basically reverse order that you'd looked at them. The build button is for building a project. If I click on the build button, it brings up the build options dialog, and I can choose the type that I want. And you notice this is a it's a modal dialog, but I don't get a second dialog where it asks me the name of the exe to create. This is in the same window here. Let's go ahead and build. And one of the things that the Project Explorer does is it remembers the build settings. So, and it remembers them on a project by project basis. So you don't have to constantly be changing. Sometimes you build apps, and sometimes you build EXEs, and sometimes you build DLLs. You don't have to remember that for a particular project. Now, what is this dialog? Description for EXE that just popped up. This is actually an add-in. And I'm going to talk about add-ins later on. But what this add-in does is after building a project, it automatically digitally signs that EXE and asks for a description for that digital signature. So I can call it my app and choose OK. And if we go to my window, let's find my window here, and find that executable that it just built, you can see by the date and time that it just built it like a couple of seconds ago, and we go and choose properties, you can see that that has been digitally signed. So that the Visual Fox Pro Project Manager doesn't do that for you, but Project Explorer can through an add-in that that supports that kind of thing. So again, lots of functionality, and we'll talk about add-ins a little bit later on. Let's scroll down here to my resize this window a little bit, and let's scroll down here to Project 2, and let's click the Build button, and let's create a multi-threaded DLL. Now I'm going to get an error message, access to system registry denied. It did create the DLL. It just, because I'm not running VFP as administrator, it can't update the COM settings. So that's okay. So let's go back to the first one and click on the build button again. And you notice that it remembers that it's supposed to be an executable with this particular name. If I change the name from the default, it'll remember that name, and it'll remember these settings as well, whether I recompile or run after build or whatever. And if I go down to the other project and click on build, again, it remembers all of those settings on a project by project basis. There are some shortcuts. Rather than having to click up the build button and click the OK button, you can click on the down arrow button here and just choose build project. And so it'll actually go and build that project for you. Or you can choose build solution. It will build all of the projects in the solution to the appropriate type. So demo1.exe, demo2.dll, for example. Or you can choose rebuild project or rebuild solutions. So that goes and does a rebuild of those things. And this was actually a suggestion that Shauna Morris gave me at Southwest Fox a couple of years ago. Take a look at some other things we can do now. Oh, sorry, when my audio died, I wanted to show that if you right click on this build button, it automatically does the build without having to bring up the dialog as well. All right, let's talk about version control. So under the hamburger menu, I'm going to choose version control properties. And we're going to say this solution uses version control. The choices are Git or Mercurial. But if you use something else, you have the source code. So feel free to add support for that, and it's described in the documentation. And then you choose what kind of files go in the repository. The choices are binary files, no text equivalents, no binary files, or include both. It's up to you. I wouldn't suggest that the first one would be a good one. It's probably going to be the second or the third ones. I typically use the second one. Text equivalence only. I don't want to check in binary files because every time I open a VCX and close it again without making any changes, the date timestamp on the VCX changed, and now my version control wants me to commit it again, whereas nothing changed as far as the code. So I'm going to choose text equivalence only. So let's choose OK. Now, Project Explorer asks whether I want to create a repository. I may already have one. If I, for example, have been working with this project for years and just now started using Project Explorer, I probably already have a repository. So it just asks me to locate it. In this case, I don't have one, so I'm going to say yes, and it'll create the repository for me. What it's doing right now is it's using Foxbin to PRG to generate text equivalents for every binary file in the project. So if we move this window over so you can see it, you can see here, for example, in the source folder, that there is a VC2 file for this VCX, and here's an SC2 file for this SCX. And these all have the little blue plus on them because they were just automatically added to source control. And you can see that here in the Project Explorer as well. We can see the little blue pluses indicating that these files were just added to source control. So now what are we going to do about that? Well, the first thing we probably want to do is do a commit. So let's right click and choose commit all, put in a message, and the traditional one is initial commit for an initial commit. And so it's done. And we can see now we have green check marks indicating that there are no more commits that have been done here. Let's go and change something. Let's go to our program here and modify it. Oops, not run it, modify it. And you know what? This is a pretty cool application, but it's not really cool. So let's take out the word really there and let's save that. And you notice that the icon changes to the red exclamation mark, indicating that there are uncommitted changes in this file. So one of the things we can do now is we can see, for example, let's go and, because I've got the resolution set small, this menu is kind of big. We could, for example, do a visual diff of that file and see what the difference is here. And it'll automatically use whatever tool you've got configured. In this case, I'm not using really a very good visual tool, but it's using the one that that is sort of the default one for Git. If you want to see a better tool, if you have something like Tortoise Git or source tree installed, turn on this use GUI functions here. It's a brand new thing, by the way. In fact, I haven't pushed this up to the repository yet, so you won't see this, but if you wait for a few days, then you will. So anyway, so let's go and choose OK for that. And let's do that again. And we'll choose visual diff. Oop, come on. Sorry, it seems to be stuck. Sometimes I get this behavior when I'm using something like hop in or something. Let's just kill this. I'm not sure what got stuck there, but we'll just launch that again. Like I said, it seems to happen when I'm doing a demo, like using hop in or GoToMeeting or something like that. It seems sometimes funny things seem to happen. Anyway, so let's go back to here and let's choose. Oops, make this a little bit smaller. And let's choose. Scroll down, come on, visual diff. Oh, sorry, I think it didn't save that change because of the issue. Let's go back to here, use GUI functions. And let's try that again. And visual diff. And now it's bringing up, in this case, the Tortoise Git tool for doing a visual diff, for example. Other tools that are available are, let's scroll down again here. Sorry. In my scrolling, I'm clicking, so let's try and, there we go. So we have the repository browser, we have revision history, you can push to a remote repository or you can update from a remote repository. What I'm going to do with this file right now, though, is I'm going to do a commit. So let's go and, yeah, this happens too. My mouse is just not behaving properly. There we go. All right, so we're going to choose here to commit file. Got stuck again. Okay, hang on. Okay, that's off. Good. Okay. One more time here. Right click, commit file. Here's my commit message. I changed the message. Okay, and like they say in Ghostbusters, light turns green, trap is clean. So that has now been committed, and we've got our saved our change there. Let's go and expand this, and let's change the description. This is the startup program. Oops, program, and I'll choose save. But you notice the file that turned red. It wasn't the startup program, it's the project. Well, the reason for that is because the description for a file is not stored in the file, it's stored in the project. So if I go to the project and right click and choose revert, it changed green again, and now my description is gone because I reverted the changes to the project, which was that change to that description. Any questions, Rick?
Yes, lots.
I should have stopped earlier.
That's okay. I tried to add a project, but it says that the solution can only contain project in the same folder structure. Is that modifiable?
Not currently. That's something that I'm looking at, but as of right now, well, let me think about that. I don't remember if I changed that or not. Let's try it here. Let's go and add a project, and let's just find another one here. Let me think, something that won't mess things up. Let's try gauge. No, there's no.
Just don't cross the streams.
Yeah, exactly. Somewhere I've got a project, don't I? Yeah, there we go. Okay, yeah. So that's on my list of things to change. Right now, it expects that it's either in the same folder or at least a subdirectory. It's expecting that, and it's sort of more an issue with version control than anything else. So that's on my list to think about.
Okay. Can I configure Project Explorer so when I run a table, it opens with Super Browse from VFPX?
You could do that through an add-in. We'll talk about add-ins later on.
Yep. Does every project in solution keep its own home path settings, i.e., does switching to second project, will it switch over to the other default path?
You mean if you like, because opening a project doesn't automatically do a set path to, so just clicking it here doesn't do anything with the path at all. You could, though, for example, when you click on this, you could have it automatically do a set path to, again, with an add-in.
And also with the project hook.
Or with a project hook too, of course, but project hooks are so passé.
They are not. Source code repositories, file inclusion goes by Project Explorer or the .git ignore?
.git ignore. The exclusion. Inclusion is done by Project Explorer. Exclusion is done by .git ignore. Because we basically don't do anything with exclusion. Basically, anything that is in the project is included by default. So you actually would have to, like, for example, let's say that you didn't want this text file to be in source control. It got added automatically because the assumption is anything that's in the project is going to be added to source control. So you'd have to then go and manually remove this one.
And then does it respect the Fox bin to PRG config file?
Yes, it does. As a matter of fact, we kind of rely on that. We expect that config file is set the way you want it to be set. That's why, for example, if I go and modify a class, let's just go and change this class, and we'll just change something about it, like just the time, the date here. And when I save it, you see how Fox bin to PRG popped up with a little window very briefly? Mm-hmm. That shows because I have Fox bin to PRG configured to show it. I could, if I configured Fox bin to PRG to not show a progress dialog, then it wouldn't have shown at all. Right. And by the way, you notice that we now see the red icon on the VCX.
Okay, and the last one for this round, can I switch from Mercurial to Git? It is grayed out and does not allow me to switch.
No, you can't. What you would have to do is you'd have to remove version control from the project. Like, go and turn it off. Oh yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, you'd have to change the SLX file. I can't remember why I did that. There was a reason, something I was running into that just made it too weird. So, but you could do it sort of the hard way, not the hard way, not that hard. You would just basically go and edit the SLX file here. It's just an XML file, and you could just take out this line here or blank the version control. You could manually actually do it right here. You could say Mercurial option or operations. You know, Mercurial operations. I won't, but you could do it manually that way, just not through the UI. That might have some issues, so you're kind of on your own with that.
Okay, that's it for now.
Alrighty. So some other things that you can do. For example, we can drag a file from the project manager, or sorry, from the file explorer to the project. So let me find a text file here. And let's just drag it to the tree view and drop it. And it added it, and it automatically switches to the appropriate category and has that file highlighted so you can see it. And you notice it automatically added to solution control, to version control. That actually is controlled through sorry, not here, through an option here to add files to version control upon add to the project. So if we turn that off, then it wouldn't have been added to version control automatically. And the same holds true when you remove it. The default is to remove files from version control upon removal as well. You can drag a class to another VCX, as I mentioned earlier, to create a clone of that class in the VCX. If I go and modify a form, oops, not data, documents. If I go and modify a form and drag a class to it, it works just like it would in the project manager. Oops. It adds it to that form, or a container or another class, for example. It works for all of those things. This is kind of like a stupid pet trick, but you can drag a class. Let me find where's my command button. You can drag a class to _screen and have it instantiate that class in the screen. So I don't know necessarily why you'd want to do that, but you can. You can also drag a form. If we go back to my documents, you can drag a form to _screen, and it simply runs that. It's just a shortcut for running it. All right. Any other questions? Because we're going to move on to a different topic now. So any other questions at this point?
Not yet.
Okay. So let's talk about another topic now. Oh, sorry. One before we move on to add-ins, let's talk about some unimplemented features. So a few things that the project manager does that I decided not to implement in Project Explorer. One is tearing off tabs. There are no tabs, so there's nothing to tear off. But I've never actually used that functionality personally, but so I didn't implement it. Shrinking the window to just show the tabs. Again, I don't see a whole lot of a benefit to that. I usually leave the project manager open. So if somebody can make a good case for that, I might think about it, but I've never used it myself. So the files page of the project information dialog. Well, we don't really have a file project information dialog. We have project properties over at the right-hand side. But the files page, that's what the tree view's for, right? So I don't quite get what the need for that files page is. Same thing with the code page in the shortcut menu. So I just didn't implement that for some reason. And save as, just don't have a save as function in the project manager. Save as in the editor, so you can save a PRG as some other PRG, just not in the project manager itself. All right, let's talk now about a little bit about the internals of the project manager. Not going to go into a ton of detail, but I just want to give you enough so that you can sort of figure out how it's set up, and then maybe you can explore on your own. First of all, when you open up the Project Explorer, it's actually, there's a collection of them, because you can have more than one Project Explorer open at a time. I only have one open, one solution open. You can have more than one open. And so _screen has an O Project Explorers collection, and the item method of that collection, the key for the item is the folder where that project is stored in. So, for example, let's go back to my VFP here, and let's take a look at this program, display item count. So this uses you use some code that shows an example of this. So let's go and get a reference to the first Project Explorer in the list, and the Project Explorer is essentially when you're talking to the form itself. The form has a O solution member that is a solution engine object. We'll look at the class breakdown in a little bit, but it has a solution object. The solution object has a collection of projects. So loexplorer.osolution.oprojects is a collection of projects in the solution. So for each project in that list of projects, a project has an O project items collection that is each of the items that's in the project. And like all collections, it has a count property. So this little bit of code is going to go through for the first project explorer that's open, go through all the projects and add up the number of items that are in the project. So if we run this, it shows there are a total of 55 items. Now that doesn't mean 55 files because everything that you see is an item. So even though SF controls shows up as only one thing in the PJX file, in Project Explorer, it has 15 or 20 different classes in it. So those are all considered to be items within the project. So, and let's go and take a look at, So let's take a look at now some of the different files now that make up Project Explorer, not both the Project Explorer files plus your files. So if we look at the Project Explorer source code folder, it obviously contains everything that you downloaded from GitHub. So it's got the app, it's got the project file, it's got the README and so on. But there's a few files that get created the first time you run it. We looked at these briefly earlier. Project Explorer categories contains your custom categories, and Project Explorer tags contains your custom tags. Those don't get downloaded. They're not part of the download because obviously it would overwrite yours with other ones. So there's also this project settings XML. Those are the things some of those things that we saw in the options dialog. It's just an XML file, and it defines, for example, what are the available version control providers. There's one for Git, and it uses a class called Git operations in this particular VCX, and it expects that there's a .git folder, which is where the repository itself, and there's one for Mercurial. If you create a subclass and you want to be able to work with, say, source gear or source safe, then you would simply add a line to this, and now it would be available, visually in the options dialog. There's also a definition here of what binary to text converter to use. By default, I'm using Foxbin to PRG. And so there's a class that in this particular VCX that knows how to talk to Foxbin to PRG. And it also has the path for where Foxbin to PRG can be found. This, because it's included in curly braces, that tells Project Explorer that this is an expression to be evaluated. So in this case, we're going to exec script, and this basically tells Thor, please tell me where Foxbin to PRG is installed. That way you don't have to have Foxbin to PRG in your FoxPro path or in the same folder as Project Explorer. We'll ask Thor to find it. Now, if you're not using Thor, well, why aren't you using Thor? But if you're not using Thor, then you can put some other path in here, like a hard-coded path or some other expression that will tell us where Foxbin to PRG can be found. If you want to use something other than Foxbin to PRG, then you'll specify, you'll have to create a subclass to do that, and you'll specify the class name and the library here of the thing that knows how to talk to Foxbin to PRG. In your project folder, so that's in the Project Explorer folder, in your project folder, so here's where all my source code is for my particular project, my demo 1, demo 2, and so on. There's a couple things. First of all, there's the solution file itself, so the SLX file. And again, it's really just an XML file that has the settings. It has a list of the projects that are in the solution, and here's where it stores the build settings. So for this particular project, build setting 3 means the EXE, build setting 5 means a multi-threaded DLL. Whether it's recompiling or not, what the display error, whether it's display errors or not, and what the name of the output file is. So it remembers that output file setting as well. So you don't have to change it. You don't have to change it every time. And which repository which version control class we're using. So we're using Git for this particular project. The repository is in the same folder as the .git folder is in the same folder as the project is. We're including in version control just text files. Auto commit is turned off. I didn't talk about auto commit, but anyway, so all of these settings are stored in the SLX file. In addition, there's a metadata table for each project. So demo1 _ metadata.dbf, demo2 _ metadata.dbf. This is where the category and tag settings for each item, not just the files, but for each item, like, SF checkbox and FS edit box and so on. Those tag and category settings are stored in these metadata tables. So we don't change the project. Well, we do make a slight very minor change to the PJX file, not much. But most of the settings are stored in the SLX file and in these DBF files. If we take a look at, let's go and open up the source code for Project Explorer. Let me just go and launch that. And you'll notice that pretty much all of the classes and all the PRGs start with Project Explorer or Project something. That's because Project Explorer is a FoxPro tool written in FoxPro for FoxPro, it would be possible that there be name conflicts, right? Because inside Project Explorer.app, if I just had a class called TextBox, and you have a class called TextBox, and you go to modify it, what's it going to do? Is it going to modify the one that's already open inside my app file, or is it going to open yours? Probably will open the wrong one. So that's why the naming convention I used is Project Explorer for just about everything. Project Explorer this and Project Explorer that, and so on. Now let's take a look at, again, briefly, we're not going to go into a ton of detail. We're not going to look at too many classes, but just want to give you an overview of the class organization. So there's a class called Project Explorer Form. That is the Project Explorer Form. It's in Project Explorer UI.vcx. So this has got all of the visual classes in it. Well, I should say not all of them, but all of the sort of the main ones. So Project Explorer Form, this is the Project Explorer Form, as you know, kind of looks familiar. Project Explorer Form has a member called called OSolution. That is an instance of the Project Explorer solution class. This is the solution, and the solution object knows how to do things with the project, like building a project, or what projects are in the project, or doing version control stuff, things like that. So it's kind of like the engine class that knows how to deal with projects, with solutions. It has an OProjects collection that is a collection of project engine classes or objects. Each one of these represents a project. So in this case, for example, my Project Explorer, my OSolution object would have two members in its OProjects collection, each of them being a project engine class, one for demo project 1 and one for demo 1 project and one for the demo 2 project. The project engine class has an OProject items collection, and members of that collection are instances of the project item class. So there's one of these for every item. So as we saw, there was 55 items between the two projects. So let's say that one of these projects had 40 of them, the other had 15. So in the project engine object for demo 1, it would have a project items collection with 40 different members in it, 40 different items in it, and each of those being a different subclass of the project item class representing the different items. In addition, the project engine class also has a reference to a single project item, OProject item. So OProject items is plural, that's the collection. OProject item is a single one, it's an instance of this for the current one that we're working on. Project Engine also has another collection called OProject Settings. That is a collection of, sorry, it's not a collection. It's a single item, OProject Settings, which is an instance of the Project Settings class. This represents the settings for the project, like the build number, or the company name, or the home directory, or the whether debug mode is turned on, what icon to use, and so on. This project settings has a collection of called O servers. That is a collection of Project Explorer server classes. There'd be one of these for each COM object that's in the project. The project engine class which like I said, represents a project, has an O project member that is an actual reference to the VFP com object that, the project itself. So, like if you've ever done a underscore, when you have a project open, if you've ever done underscore screen dot active project dot something, you can talk to a project programmatically through that project object. This is that object right here. The Project Explorer solution also has an O version control member. It's null if the solution is not under version control, but if it is, then it's going to be a subclass of version control operations, either Git control operation, Git operations, or Mercurial operations, depending on whether you're using Mercurial or Git. And finally, there is another member of the form, which is project operations. These are things where like building, the things that you can do specifically with a project, building a project, modifying a file in that project, running a file in that project, and so on. And the last thing is that there are some shortcuts. For example, if when you click an item in the Project Explorer, some item has been selected. So rather than having to go, Project Explorer form.o solution.o project whatever, the Project Explorer form has an O item member that is a reference to the currently selected item. And it also has an O project member that is a reference to the project that the currently selected item belongs to. And it also has a member called O project settings. Those are the settings for the currently selected project. So just shortcuts. Instead of having to navigate this path, it can talk directly to the project settings, the currently selected item, or the currently selected project, again, just as a kind of a shortcut. So we're not going to look at a lot of classes. I just want to show you kind of just one thing, and that is items. So in Project Explorer items.vcx are different item classes. The parent class is project item. It's not used directly, but it's subclassed. And it has various properties such as can edit, can include, can remove, can rename, can run. These are all properties that indicate to the Project Explorer, is the edit button enabled? Is can the include file be turned on or off? Is the remove button enabled? Can the item be renamed? Can it be run? And so on. So lots of different properties about a particular item. There's a clone method to create a clone of it. There's a code page. There's what default tags to use for the item, and so on. Then there are subclasses of this. Project item file is also an abstract class. It's not used directly, but it's for anything that is a file. So a program or a class library, but not a class, not a field within a table, for example. Things that only things that are files. And so it has some of these properties set. Can edit is typically set to true. Can include is true. Can remove is true. Can rename is true, and so on. There's project item class library. So it has, again, some of these properties, but it has some methods. For example, edit item. When you go to edit a class library, it's going to launch the class browser. When you go to edit a class, so if we look at the edit item method of a class, edit item, it's going to call the modify method of the file within the project. So that way it knows how to do all those various things. So again, I just want to give you an overview. There's a lot more documentation in the PDF file that the white paper for this. Lots of documentation about how these different classes work. Any questions, Rick?
I know the crowd is answering their own.
I love that. All right, let's talk about add-ins. So we've had project hooks for a long time in Visual Fox Pro, but I made a joke earlier that project hooks are passé, and Rick incorrectly expressed his opinion that they are not. Add-ins, the reason I say that project hooks are passé is because add-ins are more powerful than project hooks. They're easier to create, easier to install, and there's way more events that you can hook into. There's 60 different events you can hook into with Project Explorer add-ins. Typically, add-ins are used to either enhance the normal execution or prevent it. For example, under some conditions, you may not want a file to be modified. Maybe the manager has to give you permission to do that first or something. Or it can enhance the execution. It can do something in addition to the normal execution. But it can also be used to alter the UI, for example, for Project Explorer. And we'll see some examples of all of these. So let's go and take a look at some add-ins. Let's go to the Project Explorer folder. There is an add-ins subdirectory that contains a bunch of PRGs. So these are not exactly samples. Some of them are useful. All of them are disabled. And I'll show you how that works in just a second. And there's also under here, there's a My Add-ins folder. This was actually Rick's suggestion. Because, for example, when we come up with, when you download a new version of the Project Explorer, it's going to overwrite all of these PRGs. So if you had set some of these to enabled, it's going to re-disable them. So My Add-ins is an override. Whatever's in here is used primarily. So you'll notice there are some duplicates, like add IP SQ search tool toolbar.prg. There's one of those here and there's one of those here. So whatever in here takes precedence. Anything that's in here would be secondary. So this allows you to go and change some of these add-ins, either their behavior or even whether they're enabled or not. Let's take a look at a template. There is a template file that comes with this to show you what it looks like. Typically, templates look like this. There's a little bit of a header there. But I took the inspiration for add-ins from Thor. If you've ever created a Thor tool, this will look familiar. There's several parameters that's passed, but if there's only one parameter that's passed, that means this is a registration call. So what happens is that when Project Explorer opens, it goes and runs all of the PRGs in the add-ins folder and the My Add-ins folder, but only passes a single parameter. And that parameter is a registration call. So you tell me, what method are you hooking into and are you active? And optionally a name and an order. If it's not, and then return, because that's all we're doing. This is just a registration call, so we're just registering ourselves with the template. So the really cool part about this is you create a PRG, you simply drop it into the add-ins folder or the My Add-ins folder, and boom, it's now registered. There's nothing else to do. No class to create and no hooking it to the project. You just create it and drop it in the folder and it's done. If there's more than one parameter passed, that means it's an actual call to do the add-in. So you put your code here. So let's take a look at some add-ins. We'll take a look at a simple one first, and then we'll take a look at some a little bit more complicated ones. So let's take a look at, oops, where's my folder? My add-ins folder. So let's take a look at this test run item. It's disabled, so let's enable it. Its method is before run item. So before an item is run, this is going to get called, and all it's going to do is display a message box. Okay, so let's save that. And let's go back to here. Oops, go back to here. Now, the way that the add-ins are registered when the Project Explorer is open. So let's close it and just reopen it. And now let's go to our program, this program here, and let's run it. Here's our add-in firing first. Before running it, it displays the message box, then it runs the program. Okay, so that's one example. Let's take a look at a different one. Let's try this add pack to shortcut menu. This is going to, and again, let's enable it. And this is going to, in the after create shortcut menu. So when you right click in the tree view, a shortcut menu is object-oriented. Shortcut menu is created. After it's been created, we want this shortcut, this add-in to fire. So this is the registration call. What it's actually going to do when it's actually called is it's going to programmatically add a bar to the shortcut menu. The caption is going to be pack file. It's going to execute this code. It's going to be disabled if we're not sitting on an item, or if that item is not a binary file, because we can't pack a PRG, for example. Packing is, like opening and just, packing whatever. And it's going to be the third item in the menu. So let's save that. Again, close, reopen. And when I go to VCX and right click it, there's now a new pack file function in the menu. It's the third item in the menu, and if I were to choose it, it would pack that file. Let's go to run main program. I use this one 100 times a day. So after create menu, so this is similar to after create shortcut menu, but it's not for the shortcut menu, it's for the main menu. Let's enable it. And what it's going to do is it is going to add a menu bar to the main menu with a label of run main program. It is going to call the run item method of the form for whatever the main file for the current project is. And it'll be disabled if there is no main file. And it'll put it at the end of the menu. All right. So save that. And let's go and close and reopen. And when I click on the menu, there's a new item here, run main program. Well, what good does that do? Well, I'm sitting on this class. I'm making a lot of changes to this SF text box. Now I want to test to see if it works. So I would have to go up to here and then here and then scroll down through my 200 programs to find the main program and then click it and then run it. Or I can just stay right here and go and choose run main program. I use this 100 times a day, like I said, because I make changes to classes. I want to then go and run the application, shut it down, change the class, run the program, and so on. Let's go and look at one more. This one here. This one was actually created by Sean and Morris from Jamaica, and this is used for doing some searches. So let's go and enable that one. This one fires on startup. So when Project Explorer opens up, it's going to execute. There's a ton of code here, so I'm not going to bother showing you what the code does. But let's put this out of the way. Let's close this actually. And I'm going to show you a bigger project where it sort of becomes more useful. So let's just go and launch VFP. Let's go and open Stonefield Query, which I showed you earlier, has a bazillion classes and PRGs and files and you name it. So it'll be much more useful here. You notice there's a text box in the toolbar now. That's there because on startup, Sean's code added this text box. But let's take a look at the behavior here. If I type get, notice it automatically displays all of those things that have the word get somewhere in the name. So I could then go and say, okay, well, get day. Let's go and highlight that and press enter. And now it goes and modifies it without changing where I am. So it modifies that program. Let me, for example, maybe I'm working on a class and I see that it's referencing some program. I want to see the code for that program. I just have to type it in here and boom, now I can see it without leaving where I was positioned at in Project Explorer. So add-ins can do a lot of cool stuff. All right, so to wind up, we're out of time, so I'm going to wind up here. Project Explorer overcomes the many shortcomings of the project manager. It's easier to use. It supports add-ins. It supports integration to distributed version control systems like Git. It has a lot of functionality the Project Explorer doesn't have, yada, yada, yada. I welcome your feedback. The best way for feedback, actually, as Rick mentioned, is on the GitHub repository. There's an issues page there. So if any issues come up or if you have any features you'd like to see, go ahead and create them there. That's probably the best place because that way we can have a dialogue with folks. Because we're out of time, I'm not going to take any more questions now, but I am going to a session. If you go to sessions after we're done here, you'll see that there is a session specifically for Q&A for this session. So I'm going to go there right away as soon as we wind up here. So feel free and we can talk right there. Thanks everybody for attending this session and enjoy the rest of the conference.
And we'll be back at 2:30 for tomorrow's cross-tab session.